Welcome, bienvenue, dobre dzień, at the webinar New Ideas for Final Exams. We will be live on two platforms today. We have the multilingual webinar on VoiceBoxer and YouTube streaming in English on ETF Open Space. Before we start, I would like to share some instructions for the participants in VoiceBoxer. I would like to remind you that you have an option to choose a language. You will find it in the bottom line of your screen. And we're broadcasting today in English, French, and Russian. So I think after these instructions, we are ready to start. COVID-19 not only resulted in distance and online teaching, but also in many webinars. So we are very pleased that you decided to join us today in our webinar on New Ideas for Final Exams. I will first introduce myself. My name is Jolien van Uden, and I work as a specialist in VET policies and systems at the European Training Foundation. I will be facilitating today's webinar, and we will have presentations from different countries. And I would also like to invite all of you participating in the webinar to share your questions, ideas, and suggestions with us. You can do this in the general chat on VoiceBoxer, or in the comment section in ETF Open Space. I would say give it a try and let us know where you are watching us from. All countries were taken by surprise by the current COVID-19 crisis. And as ETF, an EU agency working in education and training with the EU neighborhood countries and Central Asia, we have been following the developments in our partner countries. And based on the monitoring of these developments, we also defined our response to be able to continue our support to partner countries during this crisis. And one of the first visible actions we had were our Facebook Live events under Learning Connects. We were where we shared solutions and experiences from different countries, institutions, based on the challenges we are facing right now. And we will now follow with webinars focused on specific topics, and this is the first one on assessment, and the next one will be on good practice in training and support for teachers and trainers in digital and distance learning. And this next webinar will be on the 26th of May. With this webinar on an assessment will also be the start of a series of webinars where we would like to focus both on formative and summative assessment. And we will do these later this year. We would like to use the current experiences to continue our discussions on formative and summative assessment, not only of learning, but probably more important for learning. With the COVID-19, the interruption of the learning process was very abrupt, and it's impressive to see how quickly education systems, schools, teachers, and students were able to switch to distance and online learning. But after continuation of education has been organized, a second challenge arose. What will we do with the end of year and final assessment this year? These are usually very important milestones for students to share, to show what they have achieved. Have they learned enough to be promoted to the next year? Or maybe even more important, did they achieve all learning outcomes of a qualification? These assessments we might not be able to organize exactly as we had planned them this year. So what will we do today? We will share different approaches to end of year and final assessment and the different rationales behind it. And we hope by sharing those different approaches that it will help you in making decisions or in the further preparations for end of year and final assessment in your country. We will use this first part of the webinar to set the context. I will do this in cooperation with my colleague Floriana Folisi. And she will share some more information about the different approaches countries are taking, also based on the mapping we have done within ETF. After that, we will have 5 country examples reflecting different approaches, and we will have examples from Moldova, France, Kazakhstan, Finland, and Egypt. And after these 5 examples, we will have time for some questions, so I would really like to invite you to share your questions in the chat. And after that, we will end the webinar with a reflection on the current developments, but also looking forward, what does this mean for assessment in general? And this will be done by Horace Debowski, Deputy Director of Central Examination Committee in Poland. And I would now like to pass the floor to my colleague Floriana, who will explain more about the different approaches countries are taking. So Jolien, back to Floriana.
And good morning, everybody. Indeed, in those difficult times, one of the prompt action of the ETF has been the mapping of the response of education and training to this health crisis in our partner country. You can find the latest update of those findings on our website and through our social media. I said latest update because, as you can all imagine, this is a living document, meaning that is a document that is the responses of education and training is in constant evolution, so the document is evolving with it. It depends obviously on the development of the health situation, and it requires a prompt response at the policy level by central and local authorities. This is why it's important to share those findings with you. And as mentioned by Jolien before, I invite you to join the discussion on our platform in open space, not only today, but also later on, because it will offer you the opportunity to share practice, to discuss on different implementation methods, to see what has been working and what could have been working better. And this is all on a vision of new learning and assessment tool, also to be implemented in the future. Now, the ETF mapping has been conducted in our partner countries, and it has been conducted, therefore, in EU neighbors and Central Asia. Most of those countries actually are still in lockdown, except Belarus, where schools reopened, and except Turkmenistan, where after an extended spring break, they reopened schools. But all other countries are actually approaching or starting to implement phase 2. Now, general education has been the priority of government since the very beginning of this pandemic. However, vocational education and training receive support through the availability of resources at central level, including digital materials and access to learning platform. Most countries have confirmed that they will not return to school this year, and they are putting in place detailed measures for final assessments. Other countries are in the phases of deciding what to do and what is going to happen. This is why in this slide that you see, we try to cluster the response that we collect through our mapping into 4 different categories: maintaining exams, postponing exams, cancelling, and alternative solution. Now, obviously this division is not so net and simple as you see on the slide. Many times, those countries have adopted parallel solutions at once. For instance, they might have organized online assessment for certain subjects and decide to cancel or postpone for other subjects. They might also have different approaches depending on occupation and even on sectors. In any case, this is the mapping at the beginning of May, and as you can see, the dimension of those circles is different because it reflects the proportional of number of countries that implemented that specific approach. Most partner countries opted for postponement or maintain. When we consider maintaining, we also included those countries, such as Israel, where at some point it was decided to maintain the exam, but to reduce the number of subjects assessed. And here the challenge is about making sure that you offer a safe environment to students undergoing these exams. When we think of cancelling, for example, in North Macedonia, we had a country where it was decided that the state matura and final examination in secondary education will not take place. So summative end-of-the-year assessment for students will be given by teacher based on mark of the first semester and the mark gained during the online assessments. Postponing is one of the most selected options. For example, in Algeria, very recently, they decided not to reopen school. So there won't be a third quarter of the school year. They already fixed the dates, which will be in the second half of September, for final assessment. The last option is alternative solution. And in here, we include all the other options that are not among the previous ones, and basically online assessment. And this morning, we will have the opportunity to hear about such an example from our presenter from Kazakhstan. Before closing this overview on the mapping conducted by the ETF, I just want to add something. There is one point in which all the countries totally adopted the same approach, and it's the fact that they expressed their need and willingness to capitalize on the effort made with the new teaching, learning, and assessment methods that they use. So let's go on this morning and see practices implemented in partner country and EU member states. So thank you, and I send the floor back to Yolene. So from Floriana, back to Yolene.
Thank you, Floriana, for sharing the outcomes of our mapping with all the participants. It also shows that it's not so straightforward. It's quite complex to make decisions about assessment. Before we continue, I see some people have questions about the sound. There's a question mark on the left side of the screen. You can click there and you can get technical support. I will switch off this. And then I also seen that we have many participants here on VoiceBoxer. At the moment we have 196.7. It's going up. And also on Open Space we have 93 people following this webinar. So welcome to all of you. I've also seen we have participants from Palestine, Gankar from Kazakhstan, welcome, Madeleine from Montenegro, Hans from the Netherlands. These are on VoiceBoxer, on Open Space, for example. I've seen Vera from Moldova, Igliauma from Belgium, I might not pronounce it correctly, Sretsko from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Lilia from Moldova. Welcome to all of you. Please keep posting, and we hope this webinar will also support you in further decisions on assessment. Let's move the slide. Yes, before I invite the different presenters to present their examples, and I think that's why you're here, I would like to share some quick notions on assessment. First of all, assessment is a very important aspect of our education system. Exams are an important element to build trust in both the education system and the achievement of students. It's not so easy to change assessment from one day to another. Yet at this moment, we seem to be forced to do this. And in fact, this is probably even more difficult or challenging than in general in academic education, as it is essential that learners prove their competence through demonstration. And how can learners do this in the current situation? Countries have defined, as our mapping showed, or are defining alternative approaches to be able to come up with reliable results for this year's end-of-year assessment and final assessments. But defining the best alternative is not so easy, and there are probably a couple of criteria countries will take into account to come up with the best alternative in this case. First of all, reliability and validity, two very important aspects, terms we always use when talking about assessment. Will we come up with the same results when we conduct an assessment for a second time? And are we actually measuring what we would like to measure? And this also depends on the next criteria: objectivity, authenticity, and practicality. And I think specifically the last two might be quite challenging in VET. Take authenticity. How can we ensure authentic assessments during this period? Let's take an example. A student hairdressing. How can he or she shows proof at the moment that she has all the skills needed in the current situation where we're moving to the new normal, where we have to keep distance from each other? And then if we come up with a solution, is it practical? Can we implement it on a larger scale? Preparing this webinar, I also had a phone call with one of my former colleagues at the VET Institute in the Netherlands, and we were discussing this as well. The Netherlands never went in a full lockdown. The schools are closed, but VET schools are open for exams. So they are now doing some of the exams at school. Most of the time they do it at the workplace, but now they sometimes have to simulate it at school, depending on where they work. And for her, one of the most challenging programs to assess was beautician, as you have to touch other people. And she said, like, what we can come up with is that they bring someone from their own household because they're able to touch the other person. But then what if a student can't bring a person from their own household? Then the student is not able to do the assessment this year. And what does it mean for his or her next step? So it's challenging. It shows it's not easy to come up with good alternatives, taking all these criteria into account. So we are very pleased that we have 5 presenters today that will share their approaches on assessment this year. During the presentation of the 5 country examples, we would like to invite you to participate in the chat. After the 5 presentation, I will ask some questions raised in the chat and invite presenters to answer them. For our voice boxer participants, note that you can click translate on the translate message, so you can also see the messages of in other languages. So I think it's time for the first country example from Moldova. This example reflects postponement, but before this decision was taken, they also considered other alternatives. And I would like to invite Mr. Silviu Gancu, head of the Technical Vocational Education Department at the Ministry of Education, Culture and Research, to share their approach and ideas behind this approach. Italy, back to Moldova.
Yes, dear colleagues, I'm very glad to present you our vision concerning the organization of the qualification exam for VET education in Moldova in the current context of the COVID-19 crisis. But first of all, I would like to make an overview of the current situation regarding the functioning of the VET system. The ministry had immediate reaction following the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in our country. On 11 of March, in accordance with the decision of the Commission for Exceptional Situation in the Republic of Moldova, the access to educational institutions, including VET, were restricted. Immediately after the restriction of the access to the school on 19 of March was approved the framework regulation on organization of technical vocational education during the period when the access to the institution is restricted. This document was periodically updated during April and May, taking into consideration the pandemic situation of the country. During this critical period, the VET education was organized at the distance using the ICT tools for online communication. Based on the fact practical training in VET system is essential, the ministry approved the following decision. In dual VET, the VET institutions, in partnership with the company, may reallocate the distribution of theoretical and practical hours based on common solution identified. And the internships are organized and guided online according to the schedule established by the institution. The products developed in the internships are transmitted online. At this moment, we are in the period when the study year is coming to the end. For this reason, the ministry has taken some important decisions that they are no summative assessment, include theses and exams. The semester average marks at the course units will be calculated only on the basis of the mark accumulated during the first half of the year. All the students will be promoted to the next year. The situation is a little more difficult for the students from the graduates group who has to pass the assessment process and has to be certified in order to obtain the professional study diploma or the qualification certificate. Therefore, we are approaching in the period the qualification exam has to be organized and carried out. Usually, the qualification exam takes place in the Republic of Moldova in second half of June. The objective of the Ministry is to assure that the qualification exam will be carried out under the condition of the provision of the regulation for organization and implementation of the qualification exam. This decision was taken following the Ministry consultation with the VET institutions, students, stakeholders, and is based on following 5 principles. The assessment is valid, it's credible, it's transparent and fair, it's accessible, and it's easy to manage. I still believe that the situation will improve and it will be safe to organize and conduct the qualification exam starting from second half of June. From this perspective, the Ministry will approve the period of its organizations. Immediately after the approval of the period of the examinations, the VET institution will offer to the students the necessary time and pedagogical support for practical exam preparation. The managerial and teaching staff will ensure all necessary conditions for VET students, safe space, social distance, in order to secure their life and health. Regarding the examination process, in accordance with the regulation for organization and implementation of the qualification exam, there are 2 commissions involved in organization of the qualification exam. The commission responsible for the elaboration of the subject develops the examination items and evaluation criteria. At this moment, the representatives of this commission already developed the subject for the qualification exam. The second commission, responsible for the assessment and qualification, is involved on skill assessment of the students. The next step will be to establish this commission as the result of the ministry decisions. In conclusion, the qualification exam will be organized in accordance with the established rule of in the period in which it will be possible to conduct in safe conditions without risk to the life and the health of students. Prior to this, the VET institution will assure the consultation sessions for the students to strengthen the practical skills. Also, it will be organized the simulation test in order to prepare the students for the qualification exam. Thank you for attention, and I give the floor back from Moldova to Italy.
Thank you, Silviu, for sharing this example with us. I think it shows the many questions there are. It's not so easy to come up with alternatives. You have to take many aspects into account. Thank you for sharing, and maybe we will get that later to you. We will now go to a different approach. The next example will be from France, and we will have Ms. Dominique Faivre-Pierret, the General Director of the Automobile Services branch in France, who will explain the approach they have taken to guarantee continuity of education, pedagogy, and assessments. So I would like to pass the floor, Italy, back to France.
Bonjour à tous, je suis ravie de participer à ce webinaire pour vous présenter ce que nous avons mis en place pour le service automobile.
I'd like to present we are working for the automobile industry, and also, first of all, we wanted to make sure that the learning continuity is assured, and we have put
their motivation through these tools, as well as to build training resources, virtual classes, for them to be attractive enough for the students to wish to continue to learn remotely.
Привлекательными таким образом привлекать, естественно.
Trainers, a distance training offer which
Et cette plateforme présentait les différents outils auxquels les centres de formation pouvaient avoir accès. Alors en France, pendant cette période, les accès étaient gratuits. Beaucoup de ces prestataires ont mis à disposition gratuitement leurs outils. Donc il y avait à la fois des outils généralistes pour tout type d'enseignement.
With regards to the automobile sector, there are specific sectors and professions which are connected to our area, to our field, and they are structured in various competencies. The various competencies have a certification value, which means that the training organizations have to organize assessments for each of these groups, and as certificators, we have to ensure the homogeneity of all these assessments.
Оценкой знаний.
Avec les jeunes, et au-delà d'avoir des contacts, essayer effectivement de maintenir leur motivation au travers de ces outils. Et
one representative from the profession and also one representative of the trade unions. With COVID-19, we had several issues. First of all, the training timetable wasn't applied, and the training organizations were able to extend them after July. Several situations before us, and because of COVID-19, now we have to respect some health criteria which are made
Удлинили этот весь процесс.
longer, and we have to gather
С учетом студентов.
traveling is quite difficult at the moment, and within the companies, the companies are not always able to have professionals to be part of the jury. So because of all these issues, we have had to come up with several solutions, and these social partners have gathered, and an agreement has been signed at the end of April, which enabled us temporarily to put something into place until the end of July. So the following the decisions were taken. First of all, when a candidate has 80% of his required competencies, they have the certificate. So why 80%? We realized over the past 3 years that there was very little difference between the people who obtained the certificate before a jury and the people who had 80% of the competencies group. So this was about a 10 people difference, so a very, very little difference. So 80% is quite a good value, quite good data. So then the people who have between 50% and 80% of the competencies, the training companies can support the learners. They can then put in place further assessments to take place. And if by the end of middle of July they don't have the 80% of competencies, they can apply to sit exams during the second semester of 2020. Today we have a deployment situation of these temporary measures. The training centers are very happy that they are being used to help within this situation, these measures. This allows young people to pass exams by the middle of July, on one hand, and on the other hand, this solution is quite easy to put into place. So that's what's happening within our sector in France. Now I'm going to pass the floor to Italy.
Parce qu'on a fait le constat sur les 3 dernières années qu'en fait, il y avait très peu de différence entre les personnes qui avaient obtenu leur certificat devant le jury et celles qui avaient en fait 80% de ces blocs de compétences. Donc ça se joue en fait à une dizaine de personnes près. Donc on va dire que prendre 80% est quand même une donnée fiable. Ensuite, pour les personnes qui ont entre 50% et 80% des blocs de compétences, les centres de formation ont la possibilité de poursuivre la formation sur les faiblesses, sur les manques de ces personnes. Et donc, elles peuvent organiser ensuite d'autres évaluations. Si d'ici mi-juillet, elles n'ont toujours pas obtenu 80% des blocs de compétences, eh bien, elles pourront s'inscrire en fait à des examens en présentiel lors du second semestre 2020. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes dans une phase de déploiement de ces dispositions temporaires. Les centres de formation sont très contents que notre secteur ait pu mettre en place ces dispositions, parce que ce sont des dispositions qui permettent aux jeunes quand même d'avoir des examens d'ici à la mi-juillet, d'une part, et que d'autre part, cette solution n'est pas complexe à mettre en œuvre. Voilà pour ce qui concerne ce qui se passe au niveau de notre secteur en France, et je passe la parole à l'Italie.
Thank you, Dominique, for sharing the example from France, also showing like the approach depends on where learners are in the process and how you supported the continuity of education. I also would like to say that I'm glad that I see that we still have more than 200 participants here and also participants on ETF Open Space here as Voiceboxer. And I hope you will have the patience and stay with us. Let's hope that from now on we will just stay in the air as planned. We will have time for those questions later on. We will just continue a little bit longer, and I hope you will be able to stay with us for the rest of the webinar as well. I think now I will pass the floor to the next speaker. This will be Ms. Rauza Shirgatova, Head of Department on Contents and Methodologies of the VET Directorate, Ministry of Education in Kazakhstan. Italy, back to Kazakhstan.
Hello. Learning, and we have more than 64,000 students who now switched to an online platform, and they're using different platforms, Platonans, Sova, etc. And the Ministry of Education prepared 17,000 video resources to conduct online courses and classes. For conducting final attestation, we developed guidelines, instructions, and with the help of the ministry, we provide 2 interim attestations. We have more than 3,000 students who will have to take these interim exams, and teachers decide by themselves the time frame for these exams, depending on the specification, qualifications, and the area of learning. We provide teachers with special tools, and if there are some problems, we just simply postpone exams to a later date. Teachers choose by themselves the form of exam. It might be some practical work, some creative work, or in the form of testing, or other, or by using other informative resources. In June, we will conduct this final attestation exams, and some 145,000 students will take this attestation. And some of them will have to defend their theses, their diplomas. In the case of defending a diploma or a thesis, so in this case, we conduct this through informational resources online. And well, sometimes, well, if necessary, their diplomas, their works are sent by post to a teacher. Well, but the majority of students will anyway defend their diplomas online. As for exams themselves, so we conduct them online with the identification of each personality, each student, and if there is no internet in some remote places, it is possible to use other types of other means. And the ministry, well, in some difficult cases, if there is no way out, so with the approval of ministry, teachers can come up with the mark for a student basing on the basis of his previous work, previous learning, and previous success in learning. We conduct a lot of webinars, let's say 5-6 days before exams. Why do we do so? In order to explain how the exam will be conducted, how the final attestation will be conducted, so that students can familiarize themselves with all the details, and all the marks will appear on a special website. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Rauza, for sharing your approach. I think it's quite a challenge, of course, to move things to online assessment. It's also interesting that you share how you prepare the students, the learners, on how to conduct their assessment in this new form. I think we already have some questions raised on both platforms. I will come back to them later. I would say just keep posting, and I hope, despite the technical problems we have, we will be able to share the different examples. So I would just move on to the next speaker. We will have a completely different example again. I think we have been able to find very different approaches, alternative approaches. And so I think you will also hear different experiences. Hopefully this will be helpful for your further work on final assessment as well. The next speaker will be from Finland. We have Ms. Hanna Autere. She's the Councillor of Education at Vocational Education and Training of the Finnish National Agency for Education. And I would like to pass the floor to her about your approach, Italy back to Finland.
I would like to start by setting the scene. In Finland, all of the vocational education and training institutions were closed in mid-March, more than 2 months ago, and teaching and learning went online immediately. Normally, that is a combination of learning at workplace, schools, and distance or online learning. When we are talking about the final assessment in Finland, it is important to note that in fact, there is not a single final exam. Instead, the assessment is continuous. The approach we have is individual approach, meaning that every student has a personal competence development plan, and assessment is also individual. Studies can be started flexibly throughout the year, and the graduation can take place flexibly any time of the year. In normal circumstances, students demonstrate their skills in competence demonstrations at practical work right after each module of the qualification has been completed. All of the qualifications are modularized. There are no separate theoretical and practical exams, but everything is combined in competence demonstrations in the workplace under authentic circumstances. there's only one grade in a qualification certificate for each completed module. And assessment is carried out by teacher and representative of employer. Despite the COVID-19 situation, competence demonstrations have to some extent still been organized at workplaces, in case the workplace has been considered to be safe. However, even in normal situations, the competence demonstration can also be organized in other facilities, such as in a farm, forest or construction site used for teaching and often owned by that provider. Of course, strict safety measures and physical distancing have been introduced for reducing the risk of infection. The aim has been to ensure that students who are in the final stages of their studies can graduate and move on to working life and further studies. Therefore, competence demonstrations of students close to graduation have been prioritized over to other students. In fact, the majority of students who are close to graduation will graduate on time despite COVID-19. These arrangements have been fairly easy to put in place due to a considerable flexibility of the modular-based qualification structure and individual learning pathways, and of course autonomy of teachers. Exceptional times have required flexible measures and a lot of creativity by teachers. In Finland, teachers have a lot of autonomy over learning materials, pedagogical methods and also assessment, even in normal setting. This is an advantage also in coping with COVID-19 crisis. Creative and flexible ways and a mix of off and online methods are in use in assessment. In case a workplace was closed, hindering the student to continue practical training, the student may have returned to some other module of the qualification, which would be more suitable for learning online. For assessment, the student may also have sent teacher a video or photo of the accomplished work. But most importantly, the learning targets and qualification requirements have not been changed. Neither has COVID-19 brought dramatic changes in the assessment practices. The National Agency for Education has prepared guidelines for vocational education training providers on assessment during COVID-19. I will share these guidelines translated into English on ETF Open Space. Thank you for listening, and I will now give the floor from Finland back to Italy.
Thank you, Hanna, for your contribution. I think it's a very interesting and different perspective. So the context where you don't have a final assessment in general. We will put the guidelines you mentioned online on ETF Open Space. Like all other materials, also from other presenters, we have received some additional materials and we will share them after the event. I also saw that some people in the chat were asking for the recordings. Yes, the webinar is recorded in all 3 languages, so we make them available as well after this event. And then I still keep asking you to share your questions in the chat. We have one more presenter at the moment, and then after that I will be able to ask some of these questions and invite the presenters to answer them. The next example comes from Egypt, where they will postpone the final exams, but they will have them as planned. But they have a very interesting approach for the end of year assessment for the other years. So I really would like to invite our next speaker from Egypt, Dr. Mohammad Megahed. He's the Deputy Minister of Technical Education of the Ministry of Education and Technical Education. Italy, back to Egypt.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to share with you, participate in this seminar, and I'll briefly describe what we have been doing in Egypt to overcome this crisis. I will start by providing a brief about the final diploma exams, which by law must be held in order to grant the diploma to graduates. Such exams this year involves something like 0.8 million students. And what we did, we postponed it from early May to mid-June. So mid-June, we hope the pandemic will ease a little, but the important thing is that strict precautionary measures are planned. This includes reducing the number of students per exam room, a lot of sterilization at the entrance of the school, daily sterilization of exam rooms, compulsory daily use of masks, gloves, and shoes protection. And of course, this has to be provided for students as well as to supervising teachers. The implication of this is that these precautionary measures have to be provided for about 1 million persons. Now, if I come back to the learning and assessment issues, particularly for students of transitional years, grades 10 and 11, schools were closed mid-March, 15th of March. And this meant losing almost 60% of the second semester time. And final exams for these transitional years were planned to be held in April, early April. And this could not have been done. There was a great health risk actually for students, teachers, and the families. Now, the alternative to normal classes was actually included immediate actions of electronic and distance learning means, such as TV channels, forums on the YouTube, Edmodo platform, which actually helped to be very useful for technical education. It was used before for only general education in Egypt. The next point is, what are the alternatives to the exam, to the assessment in the transitional years? We actually made a lot of brainstorming, and we came out with the idea of assigning students of this transitional year a set of applied research topics. Each student is provided with 2 to 3 potential topics to choose from, and students are allowed to work in teams of up to 5 of their classmates. The design of these research topics was quite a challenge for teachers, since they are used to preparation of traditional exam questions. We have to conduct considerable coaching to teachers to establish meaningful criteria for research topic, and we actually issued or arrived at the criteria to focus on vocational context, to call for innovative research, critical thinking, problem solving, work ethics, work management on the part of the students. We had to develop something like 1,500 different topics in the 4 disciplines of technical education. 80% of these research topics were devoted to industrial education, and the other 20% were devoted to the other disciplines like agricultural, tourism, hospitality, and commercial education. Students are allowed 6 weeks to prepare their research projects, and in some cases we have to consult with industry to provide ideas for research topics, which could be of practical value. Of course, the final assessment of these transitional students will actually be composed of 3 items. The first semester grade, second, the research topic assessment, which is going to be either pass or fail, and third, the results of a practical exam that we will hold during the 3 weeks preceding the new academic year next September. Now, I'd like at the end to give some examples of the projects or the research topics. This is one example: design of a utilities room on the roof of a residential building, feeding material for dairy animals, preparation and cooking of vegetables and fruits, hinges and locks and connectors in jewelry items, hydraulic control components in mechatronic systems. Now, many positive results were gained from adopting the applied research topics. The technical education students were engaged in a research activity which challenged their innovation capabilities, developed their ability to work in teams, upgrade the capabilities of teachers in designing such topics for the first time in their career. This needed a considerable guidance and research. A student doing research on hydraulic control system, all of the students expressed that they were very avid at first for the idea of research. But after a while, they started getting more confident and enjoying the exercise. One student, for example, of doing the hydraulic control system, said that he was surprised to know that a much wider industrial application of these systems, more than the school book tells him. And at the end of the project, he was able to master how to draw circuits on the computer, something that he did not master before. A student doing research on feeding materials of dairy animals, he was, of course, afraid at first, but after a while, he said, I felt like becoming, like to be similar or like my teacher in explaining things. And he was very happy and satisfied at the end. In jewelry article, there was a different comment from the students that he could not find on the internet material and data on locks and connectors in jewelry articles in English. So he realized the importance of actually becoming better in English and access English language. That's all. I thank you very much. Back.
Thank you for your contribution. I think it shows an example on how you try to also cover skills in a period where students are not able to go to the workplace or to workshops at school, and also the challenges like guiding the teachers to prepare those assignments. For now, we also have time for some questions. I've seen that several questions have been asked, so I will start with one of the questions, and then we will have time to have some more questions before we move to the final reflections. One of the questions, I think this question is for Kazakhstan, Rauza. There's one of the questions that asks, like, what resources are recommended for evaluating graduates in remote areas? So what if students or learners have no access to internet resources? How do you support them and how can they do their assessments? Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Italy, back to Kazakhstan. No, we will try the next question, and otherwise we will give it a try later on. There's a question for France, for you, Dominique. It's more related to the pedagogy of practice, so slightly less on assessment, but I think it's interesting to ask, like, how do you ensure the practice part during the current situation? Now students can do their internship, or do they do it remotely? Could you give a brief explanation in that regard? Italy, back to France.
This is an interesting question, and I think that this is going to occupy us in the coming months, because with the economic crisis, which is on top of the health crisis, companies will need young people, and one of the tracks we are working on is the fact that young people can continue to go into companies and, guided by teachers, and have corresponding tasks which correspond with theoretical learning, in quotation marks, because lots of young people have been able to continue, despite this crisis, working in companies, car repair companies, for example, because that is among the services which were able to continue. And today, companies are beginning to open again this week, and they are once again going to be able to receive young people and overcome the lack of practice they have been able to carry out in the last 2 months. And also in training centers, we are continuing to consider how we can better coordinate what can be done in training centers and what can be done within companies themselves. Back to you.
You describe countries are opening up again, the situation is changing, but of course for all of us it's in a certain situation because we don't know exactly how we will move forward, how it will go with the number of cases and what will be possible in the near future, but also how the future in the next month, years will look like. I think I will give one more try to the question to Kazakhstan. Rauza, would you be ready to answer the question. So it's how do you support students, or how will students in remote areas who might not always have access online, how will they do their assessments? Italy, back to Kazakhstan.
Слышно, да, мне хорошо. Вот что касается отдаленных населенных пунктов, если студент планирует защищать дипломный проект, то он может отправить через ресурсы почты дипломный проект, потом комиссионно принимается это колледжем. Если он...
Final mark will be an average from all the marks received during the previous studies, during the year, or from previous modules.
Thank you for your reply. I hope everyone could hear the answer. I had some problems with the translation. There's also the question I see now, will we have the documents related with the final in the frame of distance education? I think you already shared some documents with us, so these are also the kind of documents we will share on ETF Open Space. I have one more question. I have more questions, but I now have a question for Egypt. It's a question about the relation between, or to what extent these practical research assignments can replace like the demonstration. I think you already mentioned that there will be the skills test in the beginning of next year, next academic or next year. Of course, as mentioned also in the reply before from France, from Dominique, we all are hoping that everything keeps opening up, but of course we are not sure. So how do you see the relation between those assignments, and to what extent can they replace practice skills assessment in the workshops? Italy, back to Egypt.
This is a valid question actually, but the research topics actually could not completely replace the practical work. And for this reason, we are going to hold sort of practical assessment exams before the next semester starts. And we will get experience actually of holding this in a safe environment, because the practical exams we will hold for the diploma, the final year students, mid-June. So we will go into the experience of holding the practical exams totally in a new environment that we have never done before. And we hope we will learn from it and implement the same procedure again in September, hopefully. Now, I think that what we gained from the research topic, as I briefly described, yes, there may not be a lot of practical work. Even we thought of students could actually manufacture something, show us some models, but we found this also to be very difficult under the conditions of lockdown, even partial lockdown. So the benefits from doing research was actually very beneficial, acknowledged by many of the students and also by teachers. And we think we will need more of this in the future, in the post-corona era. Thank you. Back to Italy.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammad, for this answer. I think what you say is, you will get the experiences and hopefully be able to use that also for the other years later on, but also telling us that, you will use these experiences to reflect on how you can further design your assessment approaches in Egypt. Very interesting, and also interesting in the light of our next webinars. I have a very practical question for Hanna, for you, for Finland. There's a question about the videos you mentioned for the practical training. Did they already exist, or are they especially created now for COVID-19? Did they change? And the use of it, if they were already existed, did the use of it change anything during the current situation? Could you explain us a little bit more about that? Italy, back to Finland.
In fact, what we did at our agency, National Agency for Education, when the COVID-19 crisis started, is that we started collecting all of the digital learning materials and provided links to these already existing materials on our website. And there were some videos and online learning materials, or quite a few. And now we have a platform for providing them for the use of the teachers. But what is important is that, you know, the digital skills of teachers have been actively developed in Finland for the past 10 years. And I think that was very important issue when the teachers had to make the change very quickly with a very strict timetable. And I'm certain that there are much more now learning materials existing to share. And we continue as an agency to facilitate the sharing of this material to all of the education providers that are in this crisis together. And this will be also very useful in the future. I think, you know, we are not going back to the former times, but, you know, we'll continue also using more and more digital learning material. I hope this replied to your question, and now back to Italy from Finland.
Yeah, thank you for your reply, and I think the sharing is a very important aspect at the moment for us all, not only of the videos on skills, what you mentioned, the digital skills of teachers, but also to learn on other aspects. And the digital skills are also very important. You mentioned that you already have a history of 10 years. I would just like use this opportunity as well to refer to our next webinar, which will focus on the digital skills of teachers, or the skills of teachers to be able to provide distance and online education. So I would invite everyone to join that webinar as well. I will ask one last question, and then we will go to the reflections. I have one more question for Moldova, Silviu, for you. And the question is, apart from the technical arguments of managing the health and safety risk, are there other considerations that influenced your decision to organize the exams as done right now? What you mentioned some during your presentation, but what were the key criteria to come up with the current decision? Italy, back to Moldova.
It's a very good question, and the main focus is also on the health. But to organize something online on the different type of the evaluation, for us it's a little difficult. We also think about some kind of evaluation for online, but the number of students who can participate on this is very low, and we don't have the possibility to organize the final exam for all the system in the same way. And for these reasons, we think about this for postpone it and to organize when this will be safety and be possible to do for all the students. And the general is to respect these 5 criteria who we approve it in our regulation, and we give a sign for all and from the labor market. This is our view, like a ministry, how to organize, how to evaluate the competence of the students, and we try to have the best how it's possible to evaluate the students. If I respond from your questions, back to Italy.
Thank you, Silviu, for your reply. I think also you clearly described also during your presentation that you considered several approaches, and now with the postponement, you take the time to conduct the assessments as initial planned, but then taking all the precautions. We will go to the final part of this webinar, slightly later due to the technical issues, but I'm glad that still many of you are here with us. I would like to invite Mr. Horaci Debowski from the Central Examination Committee of Poland, Deputy Director, to share some of your reflections. You have heard the different speakers. What do you think it will mean for us, the current situation? What can we learn from it? Can we learn lessons for the future? How do we need to look at assessment in the future? I hope you can share some of your reflections with us. I pass the floor to you. Italy, back to Poland.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this very interesting seminar, and having this quite difficult task to share some opinions, points for further actions. Well, when I was listening to the presentations and to the discussions, I think that it is very important for us to answer this question: is vocational education, is that exam different than other spheres of the social and working life? I think it is the question we all ask ourselves, and I think this question is also being asked by stakeholders and the decision makers. If we will allow massage therapies, hairdressers, firefighters, IT specialists, other professions to work in the economy, can we allow to examine in these professions? And I think that depending on the answer on this answer, and I think that this answer should be provided in each system individually, it will be easier to make decisions regarding solutions and actions in these uncertain and turbulent times. I think this question might be answered by the participants of the seminar. Yes, we hear from different stakeholders, like from adults who continue to work despite these times. They say, well, organize exams because certificates will allow us to have better bargaining position on the labor market. Whereas learners at schools, they say, we feel less prepared, please postpone exams. Some professional organizations say, we need specialists like firefighters, medical professions, others. Without certificates, people cannot enter into this profession, enter into the labor market. So please organize exams. So I think it is a crucial issue if we treat professional learning, professional exams different. And this also relates to the safety measures. Should we take different safety measures, it was mentioned already during the seminar, than in the real economy? If we prepare learners to perform work, should we follow more strict rules than in the real economy? That practical exam is of different nature than in general exam. It was mentioned in the case of Finland, but I think not only in Finland, that practical exam is usually it is some demonstration in front of a jury, that not too many people are in one place. In many occasions, exams need to be conducted outside, like forest construction site. So from this perspective, it seems that organization of exam is less problematic than organization of learning in schools. Because we don't need to have so many learners in class. There is no problem with the internet connections. There is no need. There is no problem with the equipment. Not always present employers who can take the burden of providing practical training. So I think that the pedagogy and the teaching practice might be ahead of exam practice. This leads to conclusion that we might be willing to search for innovative approaches at the school level and from all over the world. Yesterday I talked with the massage therapist who teaches blind persons how to massage via distant learning. We would never know it is feasible unless we heard it from the teachers practicing the learning in this situation. So this also brings us to another conclusion, that each profession might need a specifically tailored solution, and we should be ready for this flexibility. It is also interesting. It will be also interesting to see how the crisis will affect teaching. I think it is for the first time that the world learners might compare pedagogies of different teachers from different schools by seeing what materials are put in a website online, how the classes are being organized. And this leads me to another point regarding strategies we take in making decisions based on we were discussing today. I think that we should take into consideration in our decisions situation that in autumn and in the coming months actually the situation will not be better, but maybe it will be worse. We hear from the stakeholders we hear from the stakeholders, employees or employers, let's take wait and see strategy. Let's wait for better times. I think that we should organize ourselves as if the situation will not improve in the foreseeable future, and that we should be doing this as quickly as possible. I don't think that in the coming future, in the foreseeable futures, in the systems where summative assessment is strongly embedded, that it will be abolished, but we might reflect more on the autonomy of teachers in assessment, as example in Finland and in other countries. But this needs time, and I think that this time will also show that the importance of vet research institutes will grow. That we need more thorough, more rapid analysis of the reality. And it might be the case that examining agencies being absorbed with reactions to current situations might not have enough time and resources to do this. So these policy advice from the research institutes analyzing the situation might be of more relevance now than it was before. And finally, related to the validity of exams in times of COVID and in times of changing economy in general, we see that certain types of competencies, transversal competencies, learning to learn, working in groups, entrepreneurship and others, are being more and more important, and at the same time that they are not present in the summative assessment. So these times they might give us an additional point for reflection about these linkages of formative and summative assessment to enhance development of these skills. Today there were given a number of examples of using technologies in teaching, but I think that we might use more technology in assessing skills, using technology videos in the portfolios, documenting fulfillment of tasks by learners, or using computer-based assessment for the written part of the exam. So these aspects I think are worth further analysis. I think that it will be also important that we continue to learn from each other around the world and to share practices, approaches, and solutions. That would be this from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Horaci, for sharing your reflections. I think you pointed out a number of important points. You said teaching and pedagogy is maybe ahead of our assessment practices. We need to reflect on what we're doing and now reflect on the autonomy of teachers in assessment, research. I think it would be a great opportunity to do some research on what's happening with assessment and what it means for the rest of the career in education and work for students. And yes, technology, how will we use that in the future? I think also we can learn a lot from the current experiences. We would like to continue with some webinars on assessment, formative and summative assessment. So this discussion will be continued, and these reflections are important inputs for this discussion. We invite you also to continue the discussion on open space, where we will share all the documents we have received from presenters, where you might continue with some of the questions we were not able to ask today. We hope that you will join us in these discussions, share your suggestions, ideas, questions, and we would like to answer, to reply, to engage. For now, I would like to thank all presenters for sharing their examples today and the reflections, and all participants for staying with us, also despite those technical issues. We hope we won't have these issues in the future for future webinars. I think we will learn from these experiences as well. In the meantime, I would also like you to ask a short feedback questionnaire. We would like to hear what you thought of the webinar, so we can improve in the future as well. The link to the feedback questionnaire will be shared in the chat, so you can just click on it. There are only 6 questions, not more, so please provide us with your feedback. As mentioned, this was the first webinar on the Learning Connects. We will have the next one on the 26th of May. This one will be on digital and distance learning, good practice in training and support for teachers and training. This was it for today. We hope you got something out of this. It will help you with your future preparations. We like to hear in that regard from you as well. For regular, I just saw a message on it in the chat as well. Do we get a certificate? What we are working on now is to see if you are a regular attendant in our webinars on assessment. At the end, we will provide an open badge, but this is still work in progress, so can't promise it yet, but we are working on it. For now, I just would like to wish you good luck with all the preparations for the final exams, and have a good rest of the day, and thank you for staying with us. Bye from Italy.